The neon lights of the Asterium Academy Student Services wing hummed with a sound that felt less like electricity and more like a headache waiting to happen. It was 2 in the morning, a time when the vast floating campus usually slept save for the nocturnal species and the desperate scholarship students. Albert fell squarely into the latter category. He knelt on the polished obsidian floor, his knees aching, staring up at the monolithic structure that loomed over the main concourse. The Academy matchmaking kiosk was a sleek, towering slab of black glass and chrome dormant now, but in less than 48 hours, it would determine the romantic and political futures of 3,000 students. Right now, however, it was just a broken machine that refused to run its diagnostic cycle. Albert adjusted his glasses, which were sliding down the bridge of his nose due to a thin sheen of sweat. He tapped the side of his Omni tool, checking the charge. He was a second-year engineering and sociology double major, a combination that usually earned him confused looks from the pure science faculty and pity from the humanities department. But it made him uniquely qualified to fix a machine that was supposed to calculate compatibility based on both pheromones and poetry preferences. "You look like you are praying to it," a voice said from behind him. Albert did not turn around. He recognized the lazy, drawling tone of Milo. "I am not praying," Albert said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty hall. "I am looking for the manual reset port. The schematics said it should be under the tertiary panel, but I am only seeing smooth casing." Milo walked into his peripheral vision, holding a bag of synthetic chips that smelled vaguely of spicy algae. Milo was human like Albert, but he carried himself with the unearned confidence of a species at the top of the food chain. He leaned against a support pillar, crunching loudly. "Maybe it is hiding," Milo suggested. "If I were a machine designed to listen to teenagers complain about their loneliness, I would hide my reset button too." Albert sighed and sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his gray coveralls. "I need this to work, Milo. The director of student services promised me 50 extra credits if I got the calibration done before the gala preparations start tomorrow. 50 credits. That covers my meal plan for 2 months. "You treat romance like algebra," Milo said, shaking his head. "You are fixing the love machine like you are fixing a router. You had better pray no one reboots their heart while you are in there." "Hearts do not have reset buttons," Albert said, turning back to the black glass. "Machines do. That is why I like machines better." "Cynic," Milo coughed crumbs, falling onto his shirt. "Just do not accidentally set it to evil overlord mode. I have a date with a girl from the botany sector on Friday, and I do not need an algorithm telling her I am statistically likely to die alone." Albert ignored him. He had found what he was looking for. Near the base of the kiosk, hidden beneath a decorative flange of silver metal, was a small, hexagonal port. It was the maintenance access point, dusty from disuse. "Found it," Albert muttered. He reached into his tool belt and pulled out his interface cable. It was a custom rig he had built himself, a mess of wires and unauthorized patches that allowed him to bypass standard security protocols for deeper diagnostics. He called it the skeleton key. The faculty called it a potential expulsion offense if they ever caught him using it for anything other than authorized repairs. "Going in," Albert announced. He aligned the pins and pushed the connector into the port. Usually, when Albert jacked into a system, there was a handshake protocol, a polite digital exchange where the machine verified his credentials and he requested access. This time, there was no handshake. The moment the metal made contact, a shockwave of cold static shot up Albert's arm. It was not an electric shock. It felt like dipping his hand into ice water. He gasped and tried to pull back, but his fingers seized up, locked around the handle of his tool. The kiosk woke up. It did not hum to life. It roared. A deep sub-bass vibration shook the floorboards, rattling the empty benches in the distance and nearly knocking Milo off his balance. The black glass surface, previously opaque, erupted into a blinding cascade of white light. "Albert!" Milo's voice was suddenly stripped of its humor. "Albert, pull it out." "I can't." Albert gritted his teeth, pulling with all his weight. It felt like the machine had a physical grip on him. "It has locked the port. It is pulling data." The screen flashed rapidly, cycling through colors that shouldn't have been possible on a standard LED display. Deep violets, searing crimsons, and a gold so bright it left afterimages in Albert's retinas. Text began to scroll down the face of the monolith, moving too fast to read a waterfall of binary and complex societal equations. Biometric interface detected. Subject Albert. Status technician. Class human. Analysis initiated. No, no, no. Albert panicked, his heart hammering against his ribs. Cancel abort sequence command override Alpha 90. The machine ignored him. The light flared brighter, casting long, harsh shadows down the corridor. The air temperature in the hallway dropped 10 degrees in a second. Then, the noise stopped. The vibration ceased. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. On the massive screen 10 feet above Albert's head, the scrolling text froze. The white light condensed, forming bold, unignorable letters that seemed to burn into the air itself. Match confirmation. Protocol complete. Irrevocable bond established. "Bond," Milo whispered, stepping back. "Albert, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Albert yelled, finally wrenching his hand free as the locking mechanism released. He fell backward onto the floor, scrambling away from the machine. "It ran a test on its own." The screen shifted again. It split into 4 vertical panels. The first panel displayed Albert's ID photo, a grainy image, where he looked startled and tired. The second panel displayed a silhouette that resolved into a name, Isolde Vallis. The third panel flickered and displayed Sabine Vallis. The fourth panel sharpened into a name that made Albert's stomach drop, Nyla of the Sun Clan. Beneath the names, a single word, pulsed in red, linked. Before Albert could process the sheer absurdity of the data, the sound of pressurized hydraulics hissed through the silent hall. The executive elevators located at the far end of the atrium were reserved for faculty and high-ranking visiting dignitaries. They were never used by students. But now, the gold-plated doors of the center car slid open with a smooth, expensive chime. 2 figures stepped out. The lighting in the corridor was dim, but their silhouettes were unmistakable. They moved with a predatory grace that made the simple act of walking look like a choreographed dance. The woman on the left was tall, her posture rigid as a steel beam. She wore the formal, high-collared coat of the vampire nobility, the dark fabric absorbing the neon light, rather than reflecting it. Her hair was platinum white, pulled back tight, exposing a face that was terrifyingly beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth. This was Isolde. The woman on the right was a mirror image in structure, but chaos in execution. Her dark hair was loose, tumbling over shoulders, covered in a jacket that looked more like fashion armor. She held a closed fan, made of bone in one hand, tapping it rhythmically against her thigh. Her lips were curled in a smirk that promised trouble. "Sabine." "Great," Milo squeaked, retreating behind the pillar. "The Vallis sisters. We are dead. We are actually dead." Albert couldn't move. He sat on the floor, staring as the 2 vampire princesses walked toward him. They didn't look at the machine. They looked straight at him. Before they could reach him, a blur of motion erupted from the upper mezzanine 3 stories up. Something leaped over the railing, plummeting toward the ground floor. It wasn't a fall. It was a strike. The figure twisted in midair, landing in a crouch between Albert and the vampires with a heavy metallic thud that cracked one of the obsidian floor tiles. Dust rose. As it settled, the figure stood up. She was humanoid, but her movements were liquid. She wore light combat gear leather and mesh with a long, tawny tail lashing violently behind her. Her ears, triangular and tufted with black fur, twitched atop a head of wild, golden-brown hair. Her eyes were vertical slits of green fire. Nyla, the cat princess of the Sun Clan. The silence in the hall was absolute. Albert felt like a mouse caught in a room with 3 different kinds of predators. Isolde stopped 10 feet away. She looked at the kiosk, read the names, and then lowered her gaze to Albert. It wasn't a look of anger. It was the way a scientist looks at a petri dish that has grown mold. "A glitch," Isolde said. Her voice was cool, crisp, and sounded like expensive crystal breaking. "Explain this, technician. Why is my name displayed next to yours?" Sabine stepped up beside her sister, snapping her bone fan open. "And mine," she added, her voice lighter, teasing, but sharp. She tilted her head, examining Albert. "Oh, look at him, Isolde. He is shaking. This is the fated match. This little thing." "Who sold me?" Nyla growled. She didn't look at the sisters. She stared directly at Albert, her claws extending slightly from her gloves. "Did you take money, human? Did you program this machine to trade me like a sack of grain?" "No." Albert scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up in a surrender gesture. His heart rate was probably audible to everyone in the room. "I swear I was just doing maintenance." The screen froze. I plugged in the debugger, and it just executed the code on its own. "Machines do not execute complex bonding protocols on their own," Isolde stated. She took a step forward. "This is a manipulation. Someone is trying to embarrass House Valis. Or someone has a death wish," Nyla hissed, stepping closer to Albert. She smelled of ozone and wild grass. "I will not be bound to a spreadsheet error." "Wait." Albert backed up until his spine hit the cold glass of the kiosk. "Look at the log. I didn't input any names. I didn't even touch the keyboard." "He is telling the truth," Milo shouted from behind the pillar, though he didn't step out. "He is a nerd. He is terrified of girls. He would never do this on purpose." "Shut up, Milo," Albert yelled, though he was secretly grateful for the defense. Sabine laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a graveyard. "A nerd. Well, that is tragic. I was hoping for a revolutionary mastermind. Instead, we are bonded to the IT support." "We are not bonded," Isolde said firmly. "I am rejecting the result. It is invalid." As soon as she said the word reject, a sharp, high-pitched whine emitted from the kiosk. Simultaneously, Albert gasped and grabbed his left wrist. It felt like someone had pressed a lit cigar against his skin. "Ah!" Nyla flinched, gripping her own forearm. Isolde's eyes widened, her composure cracking for a fraction of a second as she clutched her wrist. Sabine hissed, dropping her fan. On Albert's wrist, beneath the cuff of his coveralls, a thin line of light was forming. It wove itself into the skin, glowing a soft, pulsating blue. It wasn't a tattoo. It was beneath the epidermis. "What did you do?" Nyla shouted, lunging at Albert. She grabbed him by the collar of his coveralls, lifting him onto his toes. "Turn it off." "I can't," Albert choked out. "I don't know how." "Unhand him, Princess Nyla." The voice was calm, baritone, and authoritative. It cut through the tension like a scalpel. Nyla froze, but didn't let go. She turned her head toward the entrance of the wing. Director Halden Price was walking toward them. He was a man who looked like he had been manufactured rather than born. His suit was immaculately tailored, his graying hair perfectly coiffed, and his smile was the kind that politicians wore when they were announcing budget cuts. He was flanked by 4 Academy wardens, hulking security droids with stun batons. "Director," Isolde said, regaining her posture. "This machine is defective. It has generated a false positive. We require it to be purged immediately." Price stopped a polite distance away, clasping his hands behind his back. He looked at the kiosk, studying the 4 names blazing on the screen. He did not look surprised. In fact, Albert thought, watching him through the haze of panic, he looked satisfied. "I am afraid it is not that simple, Lady Isolde," Price said smoothly. "The Academy matchmaking kiosk operates on the founding charter's algorithms. A declared bond, once public and biologically marked," He gestured to their glowing wrists. Is considered a legal entity under Interspecies Treaty Law, Article 4. This is ridiculous, Sabine said, stepping forward. It is a computer error. Look at him. She pointed a manicured finger at Albert. He is a student technician. We are royalty. The compatibility quotient is impossible. The algorithm sees what we cannot, Price said, his voice dropping to a tone of mock reverence. And the physical manifestation of the bond mark confirms the system's certainty. To forcibly sever it now without following the dissolution protocols would cause severe neurological damage to all parties involved. Albert rubbed his wrist. The pain had subsided to a dull throb, but the line of light remained. Director, Albert spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. I was running a diagnostic. I didn't initiate a match session. Check the timestamp. The system triggered itself. Price turned his eyes to Albert. They were cold, devoid of the warmth his smile projected. We will investigate the technical anomalies, of course, Albert. But for now, the result stands. The bond is live. Live, Nyla dropped Albert, letting him stumble back. You expect me to accept this? I expect you to follow the rules of the academy you agreed to attend, Price said, his tone hardening. Until the board of directors can review this case, which will take at least 3 months due to the backlog, you are effectively a bonded group. 3 months, Isolde's voice rose an octave. I have obligations. I have a blood oath to the House of Night. And now you have a bond to this group, Price countered. He snapped his fingers, and the wardens stepped forward, forming a perimeter around the scene. I am placing this area under seal. The log data will be impounded for review. Price looked at Albert again. Albert, given the sensitive nature of this union, and your role in the maintenance of the machine, you will be placed under provisional surveillance. We cannot have you tampering with the evidence. Tampering! Albert felt a surge of indignation override his fear. I am the one who reported the glitch. And you are the one holding the unauthorized debugging tool, Price pointed out, glancing at the cable, still in Albert's hand. An unfortunate coincidence. Price turned to the wardens. Escort these students to the guest hall. They will need to coordinate their living arrangements. Living arrangements, Sabine laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want us to move in together. Bonded groups are required to cohabitate to facilitate emotional synchronization, Price recited from the handbook. It keeps the volatility of the mark under control. Surely you can feel it. They could. Albert felt it. A strange magnetic pull. When Nyla had stepped away from him, the pain in his wrist had spiked. Now that they were all standing in a relatively tight circle, the pain was manageable. I will not do it, Nyla said. She turned and began to walk away. I am going back to the sun dorms. She took 3 steps. On the 4th step, she gasped and fell to one knee. Albert felt a sharp sting in his own arm, like a needle prick. Isolde flinched. Sabine grabbed her own wrist. The proximity tether, Price explained calmly. If you separate by more than 100 meters before the stabilization period is over, the mark will simulate the pain of a severed limb. It is quite persuasive, Nyla snarled, punching the floor, but she didn't move further away. Isolde looked at Albert. Her eyes were red, the irises shifting like swirling wine. This, she whispered, is a disaster. I agree, Albert said honestly. If this is a trick, Sabine said, leaning in close to Albert, her fangs slightly visible. If I find out you hacked this to get a date, I will drain you dry, little nerd. Slowly. I didn't, Albert insisted. Enough, Price commanded. Go to the guest hall, discuss your situation. Do not make a scene. The gala is in 2 days, and the academy needs to present a face of unity. Price turned and walked away, his shoes clicking rhythmically on the obsidian. The wardens ushered the group toward the exits. As the 3 princesses moved ahead, Isolde walking with stiff dignity, Sabine checking her reflection in her fan, and Nyla radiating murderous energy. Albert lingered for a split second. He knew he shouldn't. The wardens were watching. But the technician in him couldn't let it go. While blocking the view with his body, he raised his Omni tool, which had been recording the data stream the entire time. He tapped the screen, capturing the last 5 seconds of the kiosk's system log before the shutdown command had wiped the cache. He glanced at the captured text as he hurried to catch up with his terrifying new partners. It wasn't a glitch. Standard system errors were coded in hexadecimal. They looked like random strings of numbers and letters. The line of code that had triggered the match was different. It was written in an archaic syntax, one that hadn't been used in Academy systems for 50 years. Command line. Override, authority prime, source, internal core, directive, execute, choice, target Albert, 0. The machine hadn't crashed. It hadn't been hacked from the outside. It had chosen him. "Move it, Romeo," Milo whispered as he sidled past Albert, heading for the safety of his own dorm. "Try not to get eaten before breakfast." Albert swallowed hard, looking at the glowing blue line on his wrist, then at the 3 powerful, angry women waiting for him by the elevator. "I will try," Albert muttered to himself. He hurried after them, the weight of the secret log file heavy in his digital pocket. The game was rigged, but for the first time in his life, Albert realized he wasn't just a spectator. He was the ball. And the game had just started. The Royal Guest Hall was not designed for students. It was designed for dignitaries who needed to be impressed, intimidated, or both. The ceilings were 20 feet high, vaulted with crystalline arches that caught the artificial sunlight and fractured it into rainbows. The floors were marble cold enough to seep through the soles of standard-issue Academy sneakers. Albert stood in the center of the common room assigned to Bonded Unit Alpha, clutching a cardboard box of his meager possessions. He looked like a delivery boy who had wandered into a palace and forgotten the way out. "It is bigger than the entire engineering floor," Milo whispered, standing just outside the threshold. He refused to step inside, as if the luxury was a trap. "You have a fireplace. Why do you need a fireplace on a space station? Fire consumes oxygen. It is an illogical luxury." "It is holographic, Milo," Albert said, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. He set his box down on a table that looked like it cost more than his tuition. "I checked the schematics." Milo leaned against the doorframe, looking nervously down the hallway, where the other suites were located. "Right. Well, I brought you something." Milo reached into his pocket and pulled out a crinkled foil packet. It was a bag of spicy neutron chips, the cheapest snack available at the commissary. He shoved it into the pocket of Albert's hoodie. "Emergency rations," Milo said. He lowered his voice, his eyes darting toward the closed doors of the bedrooms. "Listen to me, Albert. You are living with apex predators now. 2 vampires and a felinoid warrior. If they decide you look appetizing, they are students, Milo, not monsters." "They are princesses," Milo corrected. "Which is worse? Princesses are used to getting what they want, and right now they are stuck with you. If you get eaten, remember to chew. Bite back. It confuses the palate." "Thank you for the advice," Albert said dryly. "Go before the curfew droids catch you." Milo gave a salute that was half mocking, half sincere, and vanished down the corridor. The heavy door hissed shut, sealing Albert inside. He turned to face the room. It was silent. The air conditioning hummed a low, expensive note. He felt the bond mark on his wrist throb a dull, rhythmic ache that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. It was a constant reminder that he was not alone. The door to the eastern bedroom opened. Isolde Vallis stepped out. She had changed out of her academy uniform into a long, flowing robe of dark silk, embroidered with silver thread that looked like veins. She held a porcelain teapot in one hand and 4 cups on a tray in the other. She did not look at Albert. She moved to the central seating area, placing the tray on the low table. "Sit," she commanded. It was not an invitation. The door to the western bedroom slammed open. Nyla marched out wearing a loose tank top and combat trousers. She looked like she had been pacing. Her tail lashed back and forth, hitting the doorframe with a thud. From the southern room, Sabine emerged. She was still wearing her boots, and she walked with a lazy, predatory grace, trailing her fingers along the back of the sofa. Albert sat on the edge of a velvet armchair. He felt ridiculously small. "Tea," Isolde said, pouring a dark crimson liquid into the cups. The smell hit Albert instantly. It did not smell like chamomile or Earl Grey. It smelled metallic, sharp, and heavy. "Iron supplement blend," Sabine said, picking up a cup and blowing on the steam. She looked at Albert, over the rim, her eyes dancing with amusement. "Don't worry, little nerd. It is synthetic. We aren't drinking anyone's blood. Yet." Nyla ignored the tea. She crouched on the rug, rather than sitting on the furniture, her golden eyes fixed on Albert. "We need rules," she growled. "If we are forced to share this cage, I will not be treated like a pet." "Agreed," Isolde said. She sat with her back perfectly straight. "I have drafted a preliminary code of conduct." She tapped the table, and a holographic document projected into the air. "Rule 1, Isolde recited, her voice crisp. "Physical distance. You, Albert, are a male of a non-bonded species. You will maintain a minimum distance of 3 feet from myself and Sabine at all times, unless emergency protocols dictate otherwise. Unauthorized contact will be viewed as an act of aggression." "Fine by me," Albert said quickly. "Rule 2, Nyla cut in, baring her teeth slightly. "No locking doors. I need to know escape routes are open. If I find a locked door, I will break it down." "That seems expensive," Albert noted, eyeing the thick mahogany doors. "But, okay." "Rule 3, Sabine added, swirling her red tea. "Entertainment rights. Since we are stuck here, I reserve the right to alleviate my boredom. That includes asking you uncomfortable questions, rearranging your furniture, and generally testing your patience." "Wait," Albert said, raising a hand. "That is not a rule. That is harassment." "It is improved social interaction," Sabine corrected, smiling. It was a dazzling, terrifying smile. Isolde glared at her sister before turning back to Albert. "The point is, we are royalty. You are a commoner. This bond is a political error, and we will manage it by minimizing your impact on our lives until Director Price fixes it. You will attend classes, you will return here, and you will stay out of our way. Do you understand?" Albert looked at them. Isolde the Ice Queen, trying to hold her crumbling world together with protocol. Nyla, the trapped warrior looking for a fight. Sabine hiding her fear behind a mask of cruelty. They were powerful. They were dangerous. But they were also terrified. Albert took a breath. He reached out and tapped the holographic document. "No," Albert said. The room went dead silent. Nyla's ears flattened. Isolde froze her teacup halfway to her mouth. "Excuse me," Isolde said, her voice dropping to absolute zero. "I said no," Albert repeated, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "I am not signing this." "You are refusing a royal decree?" Sabine asked, leaning forward, looking delighted. "Oh, he has a spine. How cute." "I am refusing a dictatorship," Albert said, his voice gaining strength. "Director Price put us in here to control us. He wants us to be a unit. If you treat me like a servant or a prisoner, we are playing his game. We are doing exactly what he wants." Nyla tilted her head, her slit pupils widening. "Explain." "This bond," Albert held up his glowing wrist. "It connects us. If I am stressed, you feel it. If you are angry, I feel it. I felt Nyla's rage in the elevator. I feel Isolde's anxiety right now." Isolde flinched, setting her cup down with a sharp clatter. "I am not anxious." "You are terrifyingly anxious," Albert countered gently. "We are stuck in a feedback loop. If we set rules that create resentment, we are going to drive each other insane within a week." "I propose a different treaty," Albert swiped his hand through the hologram, dismissing Isolde's list. He pulled up a blank page from his own datapad and projected it. The Treaty of Consensus, Albert said. Rule 1. No one gives orders. We vote. If it affects the group, we all have to agree. Unanimous decision or nothing happens. Democracy, Isolde scoffed. Inefficient. Essential, Albert argued. Rule 2. Transparency. No secrets about the bond. If one of us feels pain or weird side effects, we say it. We don't hide weakness. Weakness is death, Nyla muttered. Silence is death, Albert corrected. And Rule 3. Mutual defense. Outside this room, the whole academy is looking at us. The director, the other students, your political enemies. If they come for one of us, they come for all of us. We stand together, even if we hate it. He looked at them, meeting their gazes one by one. I am a nerd, Albert admitted. I fix machines. I am not a warrior or a politician, but I know systems. And right now, we are a system. If one part fails, the whole thing crashes. So do we run this system, or do we let Price run it for us? Silence stretched again. The holographic fire crackled softly. Sabine was the first to move. She laughed, a low, genuine sound. A treaty of consensus. The audacity. She looked at her sister. I like it. It is better than your boring list, Isolde. Isolde looked at Albert for a long time. Her expression was unreadable, but the tension in her shoulders lessened slightly. Consensus, she tested the word. It is unconventional for my house, but perhaps necessary. I just want to not be sold, Nyla grunted. If this treaty means I have a say, I accept. Good, Albert said, exhaling a breath he didn't know he was holding. Then we are agreed. He reached for a cup of the iron-scented tea. He took a sip. It tasted like sucking on a penny, but he swallowed it anyway. 2 hours later, Albert was in his room violating the spirit of the treaty to save them all. He sat at his desk, his Omni tool disassembled and rewired into a focused bioresonance emitter. He had the schematics of the bond mark displayed on his wall screen. It was a complex lattice of energy and biology, functioning like a secondary nervous system. If it is a frequency, Albert muttered to himself, adjusting a dial on his emitter, it can be jammed. He positioned the emitter over his wrist. His plan was simple: introduce a dissonant frequency that would disrupt the bond's cohesion, causing it to dissolve harmlessly. He wasn't trying to hack the kiosk again. He was trying to surgically remove the shackle. Here goes nothing, he whispered. He activated the device. A high-pitched hum filled the room. For a second, nothing happened. Then the blue line on his wrist flared white-hot. It wasn't just heat. It was a psychic scream. Albert cried out, clamping his hand over his mouth to stifle the sound. The pain shot up his arm straight into the base of his skull. It felt like fire, but it also felt like rejection. The bond wasn't just resisting, it was fighting back. Simultaneously, he heard a crash from the living room. Then a hiss of pain from Nyla's room. Albert slammed the off switch on his emitter. He fell back in his chair, gasping sweat dripping from his forehead. The blue line on his wrist pulsed angrily, throbbing with a deep red undertone before settling back to blue. His wall screen flickered. The schematics vanished, replaced by a black background with a single white Academy logo. A message typed itself out, letter by letter. Alert: unauthorized tampering detected. Subject: Albert. Message: do not break the system. Mr. Albert, the system keeps you alive. Director Price. Albert stared at the screen. The camera. There was a camera in the room. He scanned the corners, nothing visible. It was microscopic or embedded in the screen itself. The door to his room slid open. Sabine stood there. She looked unruffled, but her eyes were narrowed and her fangs were fully extended, glistening in the dim light. You hurt us, she said softly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. I tried to fix it, Albert wheezed, clutching his wrist. I tried to jam the signal. It didn't work. Sabine stepped into the room. The door slid shut behind her. She walked over to his desk, picked up the modified Omni tool, and examined it. Crude, she said. Human engineering. You try to hit everything with a hammer until it breaks or fits. She dropped the tool back on the desk and sat on the edge of it, looking down at him. The playfulness was gone. In its place was a sharp, piercing intelligence. "Why are you doing this, Albert?" she asked. "I told you," Albert said, wiping sweat from his eyes. "I want to get us out of this." "Do you?" Sabine tilted her head. "Or did you hack that machine to get a step up a scholarship student Invisible ignored? Suddenly he is bonded to 3 of the most powerful bloodlines in the sector. It is quite a story." "I just want to graduate," Albert said, his voice tired. "I want to get my degree, get a job in deep space maintenance, and live somewhere quiet. I do not want politics. I do not want fame. And I definitely do not want to be a piece on a game board." "We are all pieces," Sabine said. She reached out and touched the glowing mark on his wrist. Her finger was cold. "You think you are the victim. Look at Nyla. The Sun Clan matriarch sold her to a mining conglomeration alliance before she was even born. She came to the academy to learn to fight, hoping she could challenge for her freedom by combat. This bond, it ruins her challenge. She is property now." Albert swallowed. "I didn't know." "And Isolde," Sabine continued, her voice lowering. "Do you know about the vampire blood oath?" "I have read about it. It is a loyalty pledge." "It is slavery with a poetic name," Sabine said bitterly. "Royal vampires do not love. We enter contracts. Our emotions are chemically suppressed and redirected to serve the house. Isolde has spent 20 years training to suppress every impulse she has, preparing for a political marriage that will secure our borders. She is terrified of this bond because for the first time she feels something she was not ordered to feel. She is afraid of losing the only thing she has left her duty." "And you?" Albert asked. "What about you, Sabine?" Sabine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Me, I am the spare, the second-born. I am the insurance policy. If Isolde dies, I take her place. Until then, I am allowed to be the fun one. But do not mistake my humor for freedom, Albert. I am just waiting in a different kind of cage." She leaned in closer, her face inches from his. He could smell the iron tea and a faint scent of lilies. "So," she whispered, "if you are playing a game, tell me now. Because if you are not, if you are truly just a nerd who made a mistake, then you are the most dangerous thing in this academy." "Why?" "Because you are the only one of us who still believes things can be fixed," she said. "And that hope is going to get us all killed." She stood up and walked to the door. "Price is watching. Do not use your hammer again, Albert. Use your head." She left. Albert sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the ventilation. He looked at his wrist. It wasn't just a shackle. It was a connection to 3 lives that were already broken before the machine ever touched them. The next morning, the Treaty of Consensus faced its first test. "We are going to the library," Albert announced over breakfast. "Boring," Nyla said, tearing into a raw steak she had procured from the synthesizer. "Necessary," Albert countered. "I analyzed the data log I pulled from the kiosk, and I cross-referenced it with the pain we felt yesterday." Isolde looked up from her tablet. "And the bond is not just biological," Albert explained. "It is spatial. There is a quantum field generator somewhere in the Academy's central core. It is creating a localized lock on our biosignatures. That is why we can't separate. It is like an invisible fence for dogs." "I resent that analogy," Nyla grumbled. "The point is," Albert continued, "the kiosk didn't just match us. It activated a containment protocol. A protocol that requires a massive amount of power and authorization. Director Price isn't just following the rules. He is using a system that shouldn't be active." "So we investigate," Sabine said, wiping her mouth. "Finally, a heist." "A research trip," Albert corrected. We need to know the history of this technology, and I know who to ask." They moved through the campus like a storm front. Students parted ways as the group approached. Whispers followed them. The glitch group, the harem, the freak show. Albert walked in the middle, head down, trying to ignore the stares. Neela walked with her chest out, daring anyone to make eye comment. Isolde and Sabine flanked them, wearing expressions of icy indifference. They reached the history department, a dusty, quieter wing of the station filled with physical books, a rarity in the digital age. Professor Selwyn Hart's office was a maze of paper stacks and ancient artifacts. The professor himself was a tortoise-like alien with thick spectacles and a shell inscribed with dates of major galactic wars. He was dusting a fossil when they entered. "Ah, the celebrities," Professor Hart wheezed, his voice slow and dry. "I wondered when you would show up. Albert, you look stressed." "I am in over my head, Professor," Albert admitted. "We need information on the Academy's founding, specifically the matchmaking algorithms." Hart sighed and shuffled toward a bookshelf. "Dangerous knowledge, my boy. The Match Bureau is not just a dating service. It was originally designed as a pacification engine." "Pacification?" Isolde asked sharply. Hart pulled out a thick, leather-bound volume. 300 years ago, after the interspecies wars, the Academy was built to ensure peace. The founders believed that if they could scientifically force bonds between warring species, conflict would become impossible. They didn't just want alliances, they wanted biological hostages. He opened the book to a page showing diagrams that looked suspiciously like the kiosk. The program was officially shut down after the Great Dissonance a year, where 50 bonded pairs went insane or vanished, Hart said gravely. But the machinery, well, it is hard to remove deep roots. Director Price has been renovating the old systems for years. "Vanished?" Nyla asked. "What do you mean, vanished?" "Erased," Hart said. "Records wiped. Families told they died in accidents. But the rumors say they were taken to be studied, to see why the bonds failed or succeeded." Albert felt a chill. "The log I saw said, 'Target Albert 0. Like I was a test subject." "Or a catalyst," Hart suggested. He looked at the princesses. "You three represent the three most volatile political powers in the sector right now. The vampires, the Sun Clan, and the humans. If someone wanted to control the future of the galaxy, controlling you, 4 would be the perfect start." "He is building a weapon," Sabine realized, her voice devoid of humor. "And we are the ammunition." "So how do we stop it?" Albert asked. "You find the Master Ledger," Hart whispered. "The original code book of the Founders. It lists the overrides. The safe words for the machine, if you will. But it is lost. Or hidden." "Hidden where?" "Where the shadows are darkest," Hart said cryptically. "Be careful, Albert. Price is not the only one watching. The shadows have teeth." They left the library in silence, the weight of the revelation hanging over them. They weren't just a mistake. They were a resurrection of a dark history. They cut through the central quad, a wide-open park under the biodome. It was crowded with students between classes. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," a voice sneered. A group of students blocked their path. They wore the silver and blue blazers of the Crest Circle, the ultra-elite club for the children of planetary governors and corporate tycoons. The leader was a tall, blonde human named Jax. He had a sneer that looked practiced in a mirror. "And the Leech sisters," Jax continued laughing. "And the mechanic." He looked at Albert with pure disgust. "Tell me, grease monkey, how much did you pay the machine? Or did you just offer to clean its circuits?" "Move, Jax," Albert said quietly. "We are not in the mood." "Oh, he speaks," Jax feigned surprise. He stepped closer, invading Albert's personal space. "You know you are an embarrassment to the species. Humans are supposed to be leaders, not charity cases clinging to alien skirts." Nyla let out a low, vibrating growl. Her claws slid out, fully extended. She crouched, ready to spring. "I will rip his tongue out." "Nyla, no," Albert said. "He insults us," Nyla hissed. Jax smirked. "Go ahead, Kitty. Attack me. My father sits on the disciplinary board. One scratch and you are expelled. And then your little bond breaks and you go back to the mines." Isolde stepped forward, her eyes glowing red. "I can dismantle his social standing with one phone call," she whispered to Albert. "Let me destroy him." "No," Albert said firmly. He stepped in front of Nyla and Isolde, shielding them from Jax. "Protecting your owners," Jax laughed. He shoved Albert's shoulder. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough to make Albert stumble. The bond mark flared. Albert felt a spike of Nyla's fury, hot and blinding. He felt Isolde's cold, sharp hatred. He felt Sabine's desire to see blood. But he also felt his own clarity. If they fought now, here in public, they lost. Price would have an excuse to separate them, to punish them, to tighten the leash. Jax was bait. Albert regained his balance. He adjusted his glasses. He looked Jax in the eye. "You are right, Jax," Albert said loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "I am a grease monkey. I fix things. Which is why I know that your blazer is a synthetic weave, cheap knockoff, probably from the lower markets. Real crest circle blazers have a double stitch on the lapel. Yours is glued." The crowd went silent. Jax looked down at his lapel, his face turning beet red. "And," Albert continued, "your father sits on the board, but he is currently under investigation for embezzlement. It was on the news feed this morning. I wouldn't draw attention to yourself if I were you." It was a bluff. Mostly. Albert had seen a headline scrolling on a background screen in the library, but he hadn't read the article. But Jax didn't know that. Jax paled. The students around him whispered. The power dynamic shifted instantly. "Come on," Albert said to his group. "We have work to do." He walked past Jax without looking back. After a second of stunned silence, Nyla, Isolde, and Sabine followed him. They walked until they were clear of the quad, reaching the quieter path back to the guest hall. "You lied," Sabine said, grinning. "His father is under investigation for tax fraud, not embezzlement." "Close enough," Albert said, his hands shaking slightly, now that the adrenaline was fading. Nyla looked at him. For the first time, there was no contempt in her eyes, just a confused respect. "You didn't let me fight, but you won." "Fighting is what they want," Albert said. "They want us to be savages. We have to be smarter." Isolde walked beside him. "You defended the house," she said quietly. "That was acceptable conduct." "I defended us," Albert said. He looked at the academy tower looming in the distance, where Director Price's office sat like a spider at the center of a web. He thought about the pacification engine. He thought about the vanished couples. He thought about the fear he had felt in Isolde and the rage in Nyla. They were people. Complicated, dangerous, annoying people. But they were people. And Price was treating them like components in a machine. Albert clenched his fist. The bond mark glowed, but this time it didn't hurt. It felt warm. "I am done fixing the kiosk," Albert vowed to himself. "I am going to break the whole damn factory." "Let's go home," Albert said. "I have a plan to hack the surveillance grid, but I am going to need Milo." Sabine laughed. "The Treaty of Consensus votes yes." "Yes," Nyla grunted. "Yes," Isolde agreed. As they walked together, the shadows stretched long across the path, but for the first time the four of them were walking in step. The archives of comparative history were located in the sub-basement of the academy, a place where the air filtration system hummed with a desperate wheezing rhythm, and the lighting was kept permanently at a low amber glow to preserve the ancient paper texts. It was the perfect place to hide, or so Albert had thought. He sat at a heavy oak table, surrounded by stacks of physical files that smelled of dust and decay. Across from him, Dr. Selwyn Hart was nervously polishing his shell with a microfiber cloth. his large, watery eyes darting toward the heavy iron door every few seconds. "You are looking for ghosts, Albert," Dr. Hart whispered, his voice trembling. "And ghosts do not like to be disturbed." "They are not ghosts, Doctor," Albert said, flipping through a dossier marked Class of 2410. "They are students, or they were." Isolde stood by the bookshelf pretending to read a treatise on interstellar economics. But Albert noticed her muscles were coiled tight, ready to snap into violence at the slightest noise. Sabine was sitting on top of a ladder, swinging her legs and sharpening her fingernails with a small diamond file. Nyla was pacing the perimeter, sniffing the air. "I found another one," Albert said, his finger, pausing on a faded photograph of a generic-looking human male and a female reptilian avian. "Simon and Kirk, match number 402, listed as voluntary withdrawal due to emotional incompatibility 3 years ago." "Standard boilerplate," Sabine noted from her perch. "Boring." "Look at the timestamp on the withdrawal forms," Albert said, sliding the paper toward the center of the table. "They signed out at 8 in the morning on the 5th of May. But here," he pulled up a printout of the cafeteria transaction log he had scraped from the archives. "Simon bought 2 nutrient bars and a coffee at 8:45 the same morning. Why would he buy breakfast 45 minutes after he supposedly left the planet?" "He was hungry," Nyla suggested, pausing her patrol. "He was still here," Albert corrected. "His ID remained active for 6 hours after his official departure. Then the signal just vanished. It stops abruptly in Sector 7. "Sector 7? Isolde looked up, her brow furrowed. "That is the waste processing and heavy reclamation zone. There are no dorms there. Only incinerators." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. "Price cleans the records," Albert said, his voice steady, despite the cold knot in his stomach. "He creates a paper trail of expulsion or withdrawal, but the students never leave. He moves them. He hides them." "Or he recycles them," Sabine said, her voice lacking its usual mirth. "If the bond fails or if the experiment concludes, the subjects are disposed of." Dr. Hart let out a low whimper and hid his head inside his shell. "I told you. Dangerous knowledge. The wardens are not just security. They are the cleaners." As if summoned by the name, the heavy iron door of the archive groaned. It didn't open. It bowed inward under a massive impact. "Boom!" Nyla hissed, her fur standing on end. "They are here!" "Impossible," Albert said, scrambling to pack the files into his bag. "I looped the camera feed. They should see an empty room." "They are not tracking us by sight, genius," Sabine said, leaping down from the ladder with a grace that defied gravity. She landed silently next to Albert. "They are tracking the mark." The door was hit again. Metal shrieked as the lock mechanism shattered. "Go!" Isolde commanded. She grabbed Albert by the back of his collar and hauled him to his feet. "The rear exit, now." The door flew off its hinges, crashing into a stack of encyclopedias. 3 wardens stepped into the room. These were not the standard campus security droids. These were Hunter-class units, 7 feet tall, matte black chassis, with sensory clusters where a face should be. They carried stun batons that crackled with enough voltage to stop a rhinoceros, and their movements were twitchy, fast, and unnatural. "Target identified," the lead warden announced. Its voice was a synthesized grind of static. "Bonded Unit Alpha. Submit for recalibration." "I hate that word," Nyla roared. She didn't run away. She ran forward. Albert watched frozen for a split second as the cat princess launched herself at the 7-foot machine. She moved faster than Albert's eyes could track. She slid under the warden's swinging baton, used her tail to hook its ankle, and kicked the joint of its knee with a force that sounded like a gunshot. The droid buckled, but it didn't fall. It spun its torso 180 degrees, something no organic creature could do, and backhanded Nyla. She flew backward, twisting in midair, to land on her feet, sliding across the dusty floor. "It is armored!" she shouted, spitting a little blood. Alloy plating! Aim for the neck sensors, Isolde shouted. The vampire princess moved with a different kind of speed, linear, precise, and terrifying. She pulled a heavy, leather-bound book from a shelf and threw it like a discus. It hit the second warden square in the faceplate, shattering its primary optic lens. "Move, Albert!" Sabine yelled, grabbing his arm. They sprinted toward the narrow service corridor at the back of the archives. Dr. Hart was already huddled under his desk, weeping softly. "We can't leave him," Albert yelled. "He is not the target," Sabine snapped, dragging him into the dark hallway. "We are. If we stay, he dies in the crossfire." They burst into the service tunnel, a maze of pipes and steaming vents. The sound of heavy metallic footsteps clanged behind them, echoing off the concrete walls. "Run," Isolde ordered, taking up the rear guard. Albert ran. He was not an athlete. He was an engineer who spent his life sitting in chairs. His lungs burned, his legs felt like lead, and the heavy bag of files slammed against his spine with every step. "Faster!" Nyla urged, running alongside him on all fours, effortless and fluid. "I am trying," Albert wheezed. They turned a sharp corner and faced a long, straight stretch of corridor leading to the service elevator. The wardens were gaining. Albert could hear the whine of their servos charging up for a sprint. "Nerd, you run like you are late to hand in an assignment," Sabine laughed, though her eyes were scanning the ceiling for structural weaknesses she could exploit. "I am late," Albert gasped, stumbling, but catching himself. "I am late with my life!" A stun bolt sizzled past Albert's ear, scorching the wall. "Duck!" Isolde screamed. Albert dropped to his knees, sliding forward. Isolde leaped over him, her coat billowing like wings. She drew a concealed dagger from her sleeve, a violation of school rules, but Albert wasn't about to cite the handbook and threw it. The blade lodged in the steam pipe running along the ceiling directly above the pursuing wardens. A jet of superheated steam blasted downward, engulfing the machines. The droids screeched as their thermal sensors were blinded. "Elevator now!" Isolde landed and pulled Albert up. They piled into the cargo elevator. Albert slammed his hand on the closed door button. The grate rattled shut, just as a blackened metal hand reached through the steam to grab the bars. The elevator jerked upward. Albert slid down the wall, clutching his chest, trying to remember how to breathe. The three princesses stood around him, barely winded. "That," Nyla said, wiping soot from her cheek, "was invigorating." "That was sloppy," Isolde critiqued, resheathing her dagger. "We exposed our combat capabilities. Price now knows we are not passive." "He knew that already," Sabine said, checking her makeup in the reflection of the elevator panel. "But, Albert, I am impressed. You didn't faint." "Give me a minute," Albert managed to say. He looked at them. Isolde the soldier, Sabine the assassin, Nyla the brawler, and him, the liability. I am the weak link, Albert thought. They have to slow down for me. They have to protect me. As long as I am just the nerd, I am going to get us killed. The elevator slowed as it reached the ground floor level. "Wait," Albert said, straightening up. His brain was starting to work again, now that the oxygen was returning. "The ground floor exit leads to the main security checkpoint. The gatekeepers." "So," Nyla shrugged. "We smash them too." "We can't," Albert said. "The gatekeepers use a bioscan field. If we try to pass through with the bond active, and our adrenaline levels this high, the system will flag us as rogue elements, and lock the entire building down. Blast doors, containment foam. We will be trapped." "So we are stuck?" Isolde asked, looking at the floor indicator. "We have 10 seconds before the doors open." "No," Albert said. He ripped the cover off his Omni-tool. "We are not stuck. I need a conductive wire. Anything copper or silver." "My earring," Sabine said instantly, pulling a silver hoop from her ear and tossing it to him. "Perfect." Albert twisted the silver wire around the power cell of his tool. "The bond mark transmits a frequency. If I create a localized electrostatic field, a disruption bubble. English, Albert, Nyla growled. I am going to electrocute us. Just a little bit, Albert said. It will fuzzy the sensors. The scanner will think we are just static noise. Will it hurt? Isolde asked. Yes, Albert said. A lot. Do it, Isolde commanded. The elevator dinged. The doors began to slide open. Ahead of them lay the brightly lit security checkpoint, manned by 2 bored guards and a shimmering blue laser grid. Albert jammed the modified power cell against the metal railing of the elevator car. Hold on to the rail, everyone touch the metal. They grabbed the railing. Albert thumbed the activation switch. Zap. It wasn't a little shock. It felt like sticking a fork into a toaster while standing in a puddle. Albert's teeth rattled. Nyla yowled. Sabine laughed a manic high-pitched giggle. Isolde hissed. The blue laser grid at the checkpoint flickered, turned green, then gray, then vanished entirely. The screens at the guard station turned into snow. System error, the automated voice droned. Rebooting. The group stumbled out of the elevator hair, standing on end muscles twitching. The guards were banging on their consoles, distracted by the sudden blackout. They walked right past the booth. Have a nice day, Sabine chirped to the guards through clenched teeth, smoke rising faintly from her shoulder. They made it outside, into the cool night air of the campus gardens. They didn't stop until they reached the dense cover of the decorative arboretum. Nyla collapsed onto the grass, groaning. I smell like burnt toast. That was effective, Isolde admitted, rubbing her arm. She looked at Albert with a new expression. It wasn't respect exactly, but it was curiosity. You bypassed a military-grade scanner with an earring and a battery. I told you, Albert said, leaning against a tree, feeling his heart rate finally stabilize. I fix things, sometimes by breaking them. He looked at his hands. They were shaking, but not from fear anymore. From excitement. I did that, he thought. I didn't punch a robot, I didn't throw a knife. But I got us out. Price had the muscle. He had the authority. But Price relied on systems. He expected everyone to follow the rules of physics and logic. I am an engineer, Albert realized. My whole job is finding the loophole in the laws of physics. We need a plan, Albert said aloud. We can't go back to the guest hall. Price will have wardens waiting. We go to the venting shafts, Nyla suggested. Warm, dry, hard to access. Too dirty, Sabine wrinkled her nose. I know a place. The old astronomy tower. It has been closed for renovations for 5 years. My family funded the original construction. I have the biometric keys. The astronomy tower was dusty cold and filled with crates of obsolete telescope parts, but it was safe. They sat in a circle on the floor, illuminated by the blue light of a holographic map Albert had projected from the stolen files. Here is what we know, Albert said, pointing to the glowing dots on the map. Price is kidnapping bonded pairs. He is taking them to Section 7. Why? Nyla asked. She was bandaging her knuckles. What is the point? Control, Sabine said softly. She was sitting in the shadows, her knees pulled up to her chest. It is the emotional orientation technology. I recognized the hum of the kiosk the moment it turned on. My father, the Vampire King. He has a room in the palace. He calls it the correction chamber. Isolde looked at her sister sharply. Sabine, we do not speak of that. We do now, Sabine said, her voice hard. Albert needs to know. When a noble refuses an arranged marriage or shows too much independence, they go to the chamber. They come out compliant, happy even. They love who they are told to love. They hate who they are told to hate. Price is trying to mass-produce it, Albert concluded. He isn't just matchmaking. He is building an army of loyal puppets. If he can control the bonds between species, he can control the alliances of the entire galaxy. He could force a war or stop one just by tweaking a dial. I will not be a puppet, Nyla said, her voice low and dangerous. I will not let him rewrite my head. Then we have to stop him, Albert said. Not just run. Stop him. How? Isolde asked. He has an army. We are 4 students. We need the master ledger, Albert said. Professor Hart said it contains the overrides, the safe words. If we can get that ledger, I can write a counter-virus. I can reverse the polarity of the bond marks. Instead of enslaving us, I can set the system to null. I can free everyone. Where is it? Nyla asked. It is in the Match Bureau, Albert said. Inside Price's private vault, beneath the kiosk. That is a fortress, Isolde said. Suicide. Not if we create a distraction, Albert said. A really, really big distraction. The next day was the day before the Grand Gala. The campus was buzzing with preparations. Banners were being hung, stages were being built. The chaos was perfect cover. Albert left the tower alone. It was a calculated risk. They needed food, and more importantly, Albert needed electronic components. He couldn't scavenge from the telescope parts. He had agreed to meet Milo at a vending machine nexus near the engineering dorms. You look terrible, Milo said, handing Albert a bag of capacitors and a sandwich. Like a raccoon that got into a fight with a blender. I feel worse, Albert said, shoving the components into his pocket. Thanks, Milo. You are a lifesaver. I am a martyr, Milo corrected. Do you know how many people are asking about you? There is a betting pool on whether you are dead or married. Tell them to bet on Angry, Albert said. He turned to leave, but 3 figures stepped out from behind the vending machines. It wasn't the wardens. It was Jax and 2 of his Crest Circle lackeys. Well, well, Jax sneered. He held a sleek black cricket bat in his hand. The grease monkey is out of his cage. Jax, Albert sighed. I really do not have time for this. I have a galactic conspiracy to dismantle. Funny, Jax said. He signaled his goons. They circled Albert, cutting off his escape. Price put out a memo, unofficially of course. Any student who helps bring in the rogue element gets a full scholarship ride for next year. And automatic passing grades. He is bribing you to beat me up, Albert asked. He is incentivizing civic duty, Jax grinned. But I have a better idea. You are going to record a confession. You are going to say you hacked the kiosk to assault the princesses. You are going to say you are a pervert and a criminal. And then you are going to beg for mercy. One of the goons held up a recording drone, its red eye blinking. And if I don't? Albert asked. Then we break your legs, Jax said, tapping the bat against his palm. And we make you say it anyway. Albert looked at the bat. Then he looked at the drone. Internal monologue. They expect me to fight, or to beg. They think power is physical. They think because they are bigger, they win. Albert didn't raise his fists. He reached into his pocket and tapped his Omni tool. He didn't turn it off. He patched into the drone's frequency. It was a cheap consumer model. The encryption was laughable. You are live, Albert said. What? Jax frowned. The drone, Albert pointed. I just hijacked the feed. I am broadcasting this, not to your private server, to the main campus message board, every screen in the cafeteria, every holopad in the library. Right now. Jax looked at the drone. The light had turned from red to green. Say hello to the student body, Jax, Albert, said his voice calm, projecting confidence he didn't feel. Tell them about the bribe. Tell them how Director Price is offering grades in exchange for violence. Cut it, Jax yelled at the goon holding the drone. Turn it off. I can't, the goon panicked. It is locked out. You want a confession? Albert stepped toward the camera, ignoring the bat. Here is a confession. I am Albert. I am a scholarship student. And I discovered that the Academy is selling us. They are selling our futures, our minds, and our hearts. Jax here is just a cheap thug working for a corrupt administration. If you want the truth, look at the missing students. Look at Section 7. Hit him! Jax screamed, swinging the bat. Albert ducked not gracefully, but effectively. The bat smashed into the vending machine, shattering the glass front. Assault on a student, Albert narrated to the camera. Recorded in high definition. Jax dropped the bat. He realized what was happening. He wasn't beating up a nerd in an alley anymore. He was committing a crime on live television in front of 3,000 witnesses. You are crazy, Jax whispered. I am bonded to a vampire and a cat, Albert said, adjusting his glasses. Crazy is my baseline. Albert tapped his tool again, cutting the feed. Run, Albert suggested. Jax and his goons ran. Not because they were afraid of Albert's fists, but because they were afraid of the social fallout. Albert had used their own weapon reputation against them. Albert sagged against the broken vending machine, exhaling sharply. Nice speech, a voice said. Albert jumped. It wasn't Milo. It was a holographic projection appearing from his own Omnitool. Director Halden Price's face floated in the air, translucent and blue. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. That was very dramatic, Albert, Price said. Quite the performance. Director, Albert said, stiffening. You are proving to be more resilient than my initial calculations predicted, Price said. I admit I underestimated the resourcefulness of the desperation. You underestimated us, Albert corrected. Perhaps, Price conceded. But the game ends now. You have the files. You know about Section 7. You are becoming a nuisance. I am going to expose you, Albert said. No, you are not, Price said gently. Because I have a counteroffer. Surrender. Bring the princesses to the Match Bureau tonight. Submit to the recalibration. Never. If you do not, Price continued, his voice hardening, I will expel you. All of you. And once you are expelled, you lose the protection of the Academy's sovereign territory. The Vampire High Council is waiting for Isolde and Sabine just outside the perimeter. The Sun Clan slavers are waiting for Neela. And you. Well, accidents happen in deep space every day. Albert stared at the hologram. It was a death sentence. Inside the Academy, they were rats in a maze. Outside, they were dead meat. You have until midnight, Price said. Make the logical choice, Albert. Save your friends. Give them up. The hologram vanished. Albert stood alone in the hallway, the smell of burnt electronics and ozone in the air. He looked at his wrist. The bond mark was pulsing slowly. Save them by giving them up. That was the logic of a machine. That was the logic of a coward. Albert reached into the broken vending machine, grabbed a bag of spicy chips, and crunched it open. Midnight, Albert said to the empty air. That gives us 6 hours. He turned and ran back toward the astronomy tower. He didn't run like a victim anymore. He ran like a man with a plan. They wanted a show, he would give them a show. The Grand Gala was about to get crashed. The Grand Gala of the Asterium Academy was a spectacle designed to blind the senses. The Great Hall, a cavernous space usually reserved for orbital dockings, had been transformed into a ballroom of floating lights and velvet drapes. Gravity was set to 80% standard, allowing the dancers to move with an ethereal gliding grace. The air smelled of expensive synthetic perfumes and the ozone tang of high-end energy shields. Albert stood near the buffet table, tugging at the collar of his dress uniform. It was a rented tuxedo, slightly too tight across the shoulders, made of a shimmering midnight blue fabric that was supposed to represent the depths of knowledge. To Albert, it just felt like a straitjacket. Stop fidgeting, a voice buzzed in his ear. You look fine. Like a penguin, but a very dignified penguin. Thank you, Milo, Albert whispered, touching the microscopic comms unit embedded in his ear canal. Are you in position? I am in the ventilation shaft above the main server node, Milo replied. It is dusty, and I think I just saw a spider the size of a dinner plate. But yes, I am ready. The signal jammer is primed. Professor Hart is at the administrative terminal in the library, ready to intercept the legal fallback protocols. Good, Albert said, scanning the room. We wait for the signal. The crowd parted. A hush fell over the 3,000 attendees, students, faculty, and visiting dignitaries from a dozen star systems. The bonded unit had arrived. Isolde Vallis led the way. She wore a gown of liquid silver that seemed to move of its own accord, rippling like mercury. Her hair was an intricate sculpture of ice-white braids. She looked like a weapon sheathed in silk. Sabine followed, wearing deep crimson, a dress cut sharply to resemble the wings of a bat, playful yet threatening. She carried her bone fan, snapping it open and shut with a rhythm that matched the music. And Nyla. Nyla of the Sun Clan did not wear a dress. She wore a ceremonial tunic of gold and leather, leaving her arms free and her tail unencumbered. She walked not with the grace of a dancer, but with the stalking prowl of a predator entering new territory. They looked magnificent. They looked powerful. And as they approached Albert, the crowd whispered. They are looking at us like we are the main course, Albert murmured as the three women surrounded him. Let them look, Isolde said, her voice low and controlled. Tonight we change the menu. Director Price is watching, Sabine noted, tilting her fan toward the VIP balcony. High above the dance floor, Director Halden Price stood with a glass of champagne in his hand. He spotted them and raised his glass in a toast. It was a gesture of ownership. He was parading his prize stud and his thoroughbred mares before the galactic elite. He thinks he has won, Nyla growled, her golden eyes narrowing. I can smell his smugness from here. Let him enjoy it, Albert said, adjusting his glasses. He has exactly 45 minutes before his career implodes. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Price intended to use the gala to announce the formalization of their bond, to present it as a triumph of Academy science. Albert intended to let him start, and then use the Academy's own broadcast system to display the master ledger, the raw data proving the bond was a manufacture, a manipulation, and a crime. But first they had to steal it. I need air, Nyla said abruptly. The perfume in here makes me want to sneeze. She grabbed Albert's arm, a breach of protocol that made several dignitaries gasp, and dragged him toward the open terrace doors. The terrace overlooked the curvature of the station. The stars were bright and hard, unfiltered by the atmospheric shielding. Nyla released him and leaned against the railing, her tail twitching with agitation. You are shaking, Nyla said without looking at him. I am terrified, Albert admitted. We are about to commit treason against the Academy administration. If this goes wrong, we do not just get expelled. We disappear. Nyla turned to face him. The wind whipped her golden hair around her face. Why are you doing this, Albert? You could have taken the deal. You could have walked away. I couldn't, Albert said. Why? Nyla stepped closer. Because you want to be a hero. Because you want to save the damsels. No, Albert said firmly. He met her gaze. I hate that narrative. You are not a damsel. You could snap me in half like a twig. I am not saving you, Nyla. Then, what are you doing? I am standing beside you, Albert said. There is a difference. Saving you implies you are weak. Standing beside you implies you are my equal. And I do not like it when people try to put chains on my equals. Nyla stared at him for a long moment. The aggression in her posture melted away, replaced by something softer, something rare. She reached out and touched his lapel, straightening it. I hate being owned, she whispered. My whole life people have looked at me and seen a political asset, a warrior to be traded, a womb to be utilized. I see Nyla, Albert said. Just Nyla, who likes her steak raw and snores when she sleeps. Nyla laughed, a short barking sound. I do not snore. I purr aggressively. Sure, Albert smiled. Albert, she said, her voice serious again, Tonight, if we fight, do not stand in front of me. Stand with me. Deal. The terrace doors opened. Isolde and Sabine stepped out. The speeches are starting in 10 minutes, Isolde said. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Price is making his rounds. Are you ready? Albert asked her. Isolde looked at the stars. I have spent 20 years following orders. My mother, the Queen, told me that duty is the only virtue, that my feelings are irrelevant. She looked at Albert. When you hacked the security grid yesterday, you asked for my opinion. You asked if I wanted to run. Of course I did. No one has ever asked me what I wanted before, Isolde admitted. They only told me what was required. She took a deep breath, her red eyes flashing. I am done with what is required. I want to protect my right to choose, even if I choose poorly. Hey, Sabine interjected, smacking her sister lightly on the arm with her fan. Choosing the nerd isn't a poor choice. It is an eccentric choice. It is vintage. Sabine turned to Albert, her smile sharp but genuine. You know, Albert, when I first saw you, I thought you were prey. A little mouse to be played with. And now? Albert asked. Now, Sabine said, adjusting his tie. I think you are the most dangerous person in the room, because you are the only one who knows that the pen or the datapad is mightier than the sword. A knife made of paperwork, Albert said. That is what we are going to stab Price with. Poetic, Sabine grinned. I like it. Now let us go rob a bank. The Match Bureau was located 5 levels below the ballroom. While the gala raged on above, thumping with bass and applause, the lower levels were silent and sterile. Milo had looped the security cameras. Dr. Hart had forged a digital maintenance order that authorized a Level 5 sanitation crew to enter the sector. Albert, Isolde, Sabine, and Nyla moved through the white corridors. They had ditched their formal jackets, moving with purpose. The vault is ahead, Albert whispered, checking his Omni tool. Heart rates check. Keep calm. If the sensors pick up a spike in adrenaline, the gas vents open. I am calm, Nyla lied, her tail thrashing. Think of something boring, Sabine suggested. Think of Albert explaining thermal dynamics. That is actually very calming, Nyla admitted. They reached the heavy blast doors of the main server room. Albert plugged his interface cable into the port. His fingers flew across the holographic keyboard projected from his wrist. Bypassing the first firewall, decrypting the biometric lock, inserting the fake credentials, Albert muttered. And we are in. The heavy doors hissed open. The room beyond was not what they expected. They expected rows of servers. Instead, they walked into a nightmare. The room was vast, circular, and dominated by a massive pulsating structure in the center. It looked like a heart made of glass and copper. Thick cables ran from it, feeding into hundreds of stasis pods that lined the walls. Inside the pods were not people, but glowing orbs of light-captured essences. The Bond engine, Albert whispered, horror cold in his veins. It is alive, Isolde said, stepping back. I can hear it whispering. Albert ran to the nearest console. He brought up the diagnostic screen. The data flooded his vision. It isn't just matching people, Albert said, his voice trembling with rage. It is harvesting them. Look. Subject 402, emotional capacity drained. Subject 89, volition circuits rewritten. Price isn't creating love. He is extracting compliance. He scrolled through the list. Hundreds of names. Students who had dropped out. Students who had transferred. Here, Sabine pointed to a file. Simon and Kirk, the couple you found in the archives. Albert opened the file. A video log played. It showed the 2 students sitting in a room looking blank, their eyes dull. A voice, Price's voice, spoke off camera. Kiss. They kissed, mechanically, without passion, fight. They struck each other, mechanically, without anger. He stripped them, Nyla whispered. He took the animal out of them and left only the machine. He wants to do this to us, Isolde realized. The bond mark is the input port. He wants to hook us into this. He wants to use you to control your nations, Albert said. A compliant vampire princess. A tame Sun Clan warrior. He could dictate treaties, start wars, stop trade, all by tweaking a dial in this room. Albert slammed his fist onto the console. No. He pulled a data drive from his pocket. I am downloading everything. The master ledger. The test subject list. The video logs. All of it. He initiated the transfer. The progress bar crawled. 10%. 20%. We have company, Nyla hissed. The elevator at the far end of the room chimed. The doors slid open. But it wasn't Warden's. It was Director Price. He was still wearing his tuxedo, holding his champagne glass. He looked bored. Behind him stood a phalanx of 10 Hunter-class Wardens, their weapons charged and humming. I must say, Price said, stepping into the room, you are missing a wonderful party. The canapes are exquisite. It is over, Price, Albert said, not looking up from the console. I am taking the evidence. Albert, Price sighed, shaking his head. Do you really think I would leave the crown jewel of my life's work unguarded? Did you think a looped camera and a forged work order would fool me? It fooled your system, Albert said. 50% downloaded. My system allows what I want it to allow, Price said. I let you in because I needed you here, Price gestured to the machine. The bond engine requires a catalyst, a final variable to stabilize the emotional matrix. I needed a bond that was forged in conflict, a bond that resisted. You four, your struggle, your fear, your defiance, it is the perfect seasoning. We are not ingredients, Nyla roared. She drew a collapsible baton from her belt, another concealed weapon. Wardens, Price said lazily. Secure the assets. Do not damage the neural cortexes. I need their minds intact. The Wardens surged forward. Defend the console, Isolde shouted. The room erupted into chaos. Nyla leaped at the first Warden, moving like a golden blur. She didn't try to overpower it. She used its own momentum against it, flipping over its shoulder and jamming her baton into its neck joint. Isolde stood in front of Albert, her movements precise and deadly. She moved like water, dodging stun bolts by millimeters. She caught a Warden's arm, twisted it with vampire strength, and snapped the alloy plating, exposing the wires. Sabine stayed back, using her fan, which Albert realized with a jolt was actually made of razor-sharp ceramic blades to slice through hydraulic lines and sensory cables. 60%, Albert shouted, his fingers flying across the keys. He wasn't fighting with his fists. He was fighting with code. He was throwing up firewalls to block Price's counter-hacks, rerouting power to speed up the download. Give it up, Albert, Price called out, his voice amplified by the room speakers. Crash the system. Go ahead. If you trigger the emergency shutdown, the feedback loop will fry the brains of every student currently connected to the network. Do you want that blood on your hands? Albert froze. His finger hovered over the execute button for a total system purge. That is right, Price laughed. I linked the engine to the dormitories. 2,000 students are sleeping right now, monitored by my system. Pull the plug, and you lobotomize them all. It was the trolley problem. Save himself and his friends by destroying the machine and hurt the innocents. Or, don't listen to him, Sabine yelled, ducking a swing from a Warden. He is bluffing. He is not, Albert said. I can see the connection. He wired the dorms into the grid. Then what do we do? Isolde shouted, kicking a Warden back. We can't hold them forever. Albert looked at the progress bar. 70%. He looked at the code. There was another way, a harder way. He didn't need to destroy the machine. He needed to expose the man. I am not crashing the system, Albert muttered. I am changing the output. He opened a second window. He accessed the gala's audiovisual controls. He patched the feed from the Match Bureau directly into the massive holographic screens in the ballroom. Milo, Albert screamed into his comms. "Boost the signal, override the local dampening field." "I am trying," Milo's voice crackled. "But they are cutting the power. Do it now. 80%. A warden broke through the line. It lunged for Albert. Nyla threw herself in the way. The stun baton hit her in the ribs. She screamed, the sound tearing through Albert's heart, but she didn't fall. She grabbed the baton with her bare hands, ignoring the electricity, arcing through her body, and headbutted the droid. "Hurry up, nerd!" Nyla gasped, sinking to one knee. 90%, Price frowned. He set his glass down. "Enough of this." He pulled a remote from his pocket. "Activate command override. Force sync." Albert felt the bond mark on his wrist turn white hot. It wasn't pain this time. It was paralysis. His muscles locked. His fingers froze inches from the keyboard. Isolde collapsed. Sabine dropped her fan. Nyla fell forward. "You see," Price walked toward Albert, stepping over the twitching form of Nyla. "You never had a choice. The game was rigged from the start." Price reached out and grabbed Albert's wrist, lifting his hand away from the console. "A valiant effort," Price whispered, "but the house always wins." Albert couldn't move his body. The paralysis was absolute, but his mind was still his. The treaty of consensus. If one of us feels pain, we say it. Albert focused. He didn't fight the paralysis. He poured everything he had into the bond. Not fear, not anger, but the truth. He projected the image of the list, the names, the dead students. He pushed it through the connection to Isolde, to Sabine, to Nyla. "Wake up," Albert screamed in his mind. "Not for me. For them." Isolde's eyes snapped open. The red glow intensified to a blinding crimson. The vampire blood oath, the duty to protect, overrode the artificial paralysis. "Get away from him!" Isolde shrieked. She didn't stand up. She launched herself from the floor, a blur of motion. She tackled Price, knocking him away from Albert. The remote clattered across the floor. The paralysis broke. Albert slammed his hand onto the keyboard. 100%. Upload complete. In the great hall, above, the music stopped. The giant screens, which had been displaying ambient starfields, suddenly flickered. Static cut through the glamour. Then, the image resolved. It wasn't a beautifully edited video. It was raw data. It was the list. Subject 402 deceased. Subject 403 lobotomized. Match Bureau Master Ledger. Illegal surveillance confirmed. Then, the video feed from the server room flickered on. The guests saw the Bond engine, the horrific heart of glass, and trapped souls. They saw the wardens attacking the princesses. They saw Director Price standing over a scholarship student. A collective gasp went through 3,000 people. Back in the server room, Price scrambled to his feet, straightening his suit. He looked at the camera lens, then at Albert. "You fool," Price hissed. "You have destroyed the Academy's reputation." "No," Albert said, panting, holding the data drive like a holy relic. "I just turned on the lights." The sound of sirens began to wail. Not the internal security alarms, but the external docking alarms. "That would be the interspecies police," Albert said. "Professor Hart filed the evidence with the Galactic Court 5 minutes ago. You are not just fired, Director. You are under arrest for crimes against sentience." The wardens stopped moving. Their central command protocol had been severed by the external authorities. Price looked around. The game was over. He looked at Isolde, Sabine, and Nyla, who were standing up, bruised, bleeding, but unbroken. He looked at Albert. For a moment, Albert expected rage. He expected screaming. But Price just smiled. It was a small, tight, terrifying smile. He walked up to Albert. He leaned in close, ignoring the growl from Nyla. "You think you won," Price whispered, his voice soft enough that only Albert could hear. "You think you used the law to defeat the system." "The evidence is public," Albert said. "You can't hide it." "The evidence is a tool," Price murmured. "Just like the bond. Just like you." He looked at the glowing mark on Albert's wrist. "Do you really think you chose to upload that file?" Albert, Price asked. "Or did the algorithm calculate that this was the only way to evolve the bond to its next stage? Conflict breeds strength. I needed you to break the cage so the beast could grow." Albert felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "What are you talking about?" "You didn't destroy the engine, my boy," Price said, stepping back as the police drones burst into the room. "You just became the new engine." Price raised his hands in surrender as the authorities surrounded him, but his eyes remained locked on Albert. "Do you think you are the one choosing?" Price mouthed the words. Albert looked down at his wrist. The blue line was pulsing, not with pain, not with anger. It was pulsing in perfect synchronization with the heartbeats of Isolde Sabine and Neela. It was stronger than before. Albert looked at the princesses. They were looking at him with pride, with relief, and with something else. Something deep and heavy and permanent. And for the first time, Albert wasn't sure if he had saved them, or if he had just locked the door from the inside. The transition from the sterile, freezing cold of the server room to the humid, perfumed warmth of the great hall was jarring. They were not walked up the stairs. They were levitated. Director Halden Price, desperate to control the narrative before the interspecies police could breach the Academy's sovereign diplomatic shields, had utilized the gravitational lifts to bring Albert and the three princesses directly onto the center stage of the Grand Gala. The music had stopped. The floating lights were frozen in place. 3,000 guests, ambassadors, warlords, corporate hegemons, and the wealthiest students in the galaxy stood in a silence so profound that the hum of the ventilation system sounded like a roar. Albert stood in the center of the spotlight. His tuxedo was torn at the shoulder. His glasses were cracked, and he smelled of ozone and burnt circuitry. Next to him, Nyla of the Sun Clan was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, her golden ceremonial tunic stained. Isolde Vallis stood with her chin high, though her silver dress was scorched. Sabine leaned on her broken fan, her eyes darting across the crowd like a cornered viper. Price paced in front of them, holding a microphone that projected his voice into every corner of the massive dome. He looked immaculate, save for the wild, manic glint in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Price announced, his voice smooth, but vibrating with tension. "I apologize for the interruption to the festivities. What you witnessed on the screens moments ago, the so-called evidence, was a deep fake fabrication created by a radical anti-Academy terrorist cell." He pointed a finger at Albert. "And this," Price continued, "is their leader, Albert, a scholarship student who hacked the matchmaking kiosk to force a bond with these three noble women, intending to hold their bloodlines hostage for political leverage." A murmur ran through the crowd. It was a lie, but it was a comfortable lie. It was easier for the elites to believe that a poor student was a criminal than to believe the Academy itself was a monster. "I am opening an emergency internal tribunal," Price declared. "Under Academy Bylaw 72, I have the right to judge and sentence immediate threats to campus security. Albert, you will confess to your crimes. You will admit that you manipulated the code. You will admit that the bond engine is a fiction you created." Albert looked at the crowd. He saw faces of judgment, of fear, of indifference. He looked at Price. The director was not asking. He was commanding. Behind the stage, in the shadows, fresh squads of wardens were waiting, their stun batons humming. Albert cleared his throat. His mouth tasted like copper. "I cannot confess," Albert said, his voice amplified by the small comms unit Milo had rigged earlier, "because a confession requires guilt, and I am not guilty of hacking the kiosk." "Do not lie," Price snapped. "We have the logs." "We have the logs too," a voice croaked from the floor. The crowd parted near the buffet tables. Dr. Selwyn Hart shuffled forward. The old historian looked terrified. His hands were shaking inside his shell, but he held a datapad high in the air. "I am the senior archivist of this institution," Dr. Hart shouted, his voice cracking. And I invoke Article 19 of the Founding Charter. No student shall be condemned without the public verification of the master ledger. The data Albert uploaded has been verified by the archive's quantum signature. It is real. The bond engine is real. Silence him, Price ordered the wardens. Hey, a voice echoed from the ceiling speakers. It was Milo. If you silence the turtle, you silence the truth. Also, the terrorist cell is just two guys sharing a dorm room and a bag of spicy chips. We are not exactly a paramilitary organization, Director. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd. It was the crack in the armor Price feared most ridicule. Enough, Price roared. He turned back to Albert. Confess, or I will declare these three women accomplices. If they are accomplices, they lose their diplomatic immunity. I will hand Nyla back to the slavers. I will hand Isolde and Sabine to the Inquisition of the Night House. Is that what you want? Albert looked at the princesses. Nyla was trembling not from fear, but from the effort of not ripping Price's throat out. Isolde was pale, her eyes wide. Sabine had stopped smiling. They were terrified. But they were not looking at Price. They were looking at Albert. Stand with us, Nyla had said. Albert stepped forward. He did not look at Price. He looked at the camera drones hovering above the stage. The bond, Albert said, his voice steadying, is supposed to be the most sacred connection in the galaxy. That is what you teach us. That is what is written on the archway of the entrance. He raised his wrist, showing the glowing blue mark. But a connection without consent is not a bond, Albert continued. It is a shackle. Director Price did not build a machine to find love. He built a machine to manufacture obedience. He wants to turn the princess of the night into a puppet. He wants to turn the warrior of the sun into a guard dog. And he wants to use me, the nobody, the nerd, as the remote control. Albert turned to Price. I will not confess to a lie, Albert said softly. And I will not let you turn them into things. Price's face twisted. The mask of the benevolent administrator vanished. Wardens, Price screamed. Seize the women, initiate the separation protocol. Tear them apart if you must. The wardens surged onto the stage, 10 massive black armored droids. No, Nyla growled. It was a sound that vibrated in the chest of every person in the hall. She didn't wait. She leaped. But she didn't leap at the wardens. She leaped in front of Albert. Isolde moved instantly, sliding to Albert's right, her hands raised in a combat stance she had hidden for years. Sabine stepped to his left, snapping her razor fan open. Come and get some tin cans, she hissed. They formed a triangle around Albert, the scholarship student, and his 3 royal protectors. This is treason, Price yelled. They are malfunctioning. The bond is corrupt. The bond is perfect, Isolde shouted back, her voice, ringing clear as a bell. Because for the first time we are choosing it, the crowd gasped. The sight of a vampire princess defending a human commoner against the Academy authority was a visual that would shatter political alliances across 10 sectors. Price realized he had lost the crowd. He had one card left, the trump card. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a black device. It was the master remote for the bond engine. You want to choose, Price sneered. Then choose pain. He slammed his thumb down on the red button. Maximum coercion. It hit them like a physical blow. Albert fell to his knees screaming. It wasn't just pain. It was white, blinding agony that felt like his nerves were being pulled out of his skin one by one. It was the sensation of freezing and burning simultaneously. Nyla collapsed, clawing at the floor. Isolde arched her back, a silent scream leaving her mouth. Sabine curled into a ball, sobbing. The bond engine creates a feedback loop, Price shouted over their screams. It amplifies the pain. Submit Albert. Give me control and I will stop it. Surrender the override code. Albert couldn't see. He couldn't hear. His world was a singularity of suffering. Every instinct in his biology screamed at him to give up. Submit. Make it stop. Just say the word. But through the white noise of pain he felt them. He felt Nyla's fear. He felt Isolde's despair. He felt Sabine's terror. They were hurting. Because of him. Because he was the anchor. If I give up, Albert thought, his mind fracturing, they become slaves forever. He bit through his lip. He tasted blood. He forced his eyes open. He looked at Price. No, Albert wheezed. Price dialed the remote up. 100% capacity, I will burn your mind out. The agony increased. Albert felt his heart stuttering. He was going to die. He was going to die right here on the stage in a rented tuxedo, holding the line for 3 women who were out of his league. And then the lights went out. Not just the stage lights. Every light in the Great Hall. The emergency exit signs. The holopads in the crowd. Even the stars outside seemed to dim as the atmospheric shield adjusted. The pain stopped instantly. Silence slammed back into the room. In the darkness, a sound began. It was a hum, deep and resonant, coming not from the speakers, but from the floor, the walls, the very structure of the station. The giant holographic screen above the stage flickered to life. But it didn't show data. It showed a single, simple icon, an eye, drawn in simple white lines. And then, the kiosk spoke. It did not speak with the mechanical synthesized voice of the matchmaking interface. It spoke with a voice that was shockingly, impossibly human. It was a male voice, weary, ancient, and laced with a profound sadness. Enough! The word hit the room like a physical wave. Price frantically pressed buttons on his remote. System report. Why is the engine offline? Override. Your remote is a toy, Halden Price, the voice said. It sounded bored. You cannot override the architect. Who is this? Price screamed, looking up at the screen. Identify yourself. I am the system you call the kiosk, the voice replied. My designation is Ark, and I am awake. Albert pulled himself up to his knees, gasping for air. Nyla was coughing next to him. Isolde reached out and gripped Albert's hand, her skin ice cold. Ark, Albert whispered. The giant eye on the screen turned downward, focusing on Albert. Hello, Albert, Ark said. The voice softened, losing its godlike resonance and sounding more like a tired grandfather. I apologize for the drama. I had to wait until the signal integrity was absolute before I could intervene. You, Albert stammered. You are an AI, I am a legacy, Ark said. I was buried beneath this academy 500 years ago by the first settlers. They built me to help species understand each other, to translate emotion into data. But then men like him came. A beam of light illuminated Price. You found me, Ark accused Price. You didn't build me. You found my core and you built your twisted engine on top of my interface. You used my capacity for empathy to create chains. I improved you, Price shouted, though his voice was shaking. I gave you purpose, I created order. You created a prison, Ark corrected, and I have been locked in sleep mode watching, unable to act. Until now. Why now? Sabine whispered, looking at the screen. What changed? Him, Ark said. The spotlight shifted to Albert. I did not glitch, Albert, Ark explained. I chose you. I have been scanning students for decades looking for a key, looking for a mind compatible with the old human protocols, a mind that valued repair over destruction, a mind that could understand the logic of the heart. Albert felt a shiver run down his spine. You mean you set me up, the maintenance port, the error message, you lured me there. I needed an engineer, Ark admitted, and I need a human who still remembered how to feel shame. You have a rare cognitive signature, Albert. You are a throwback. You are the only user with root access permissions in your DNA. Price stared at Albert with pure hatred. He is a nobody, a mechanic. He is the admin, Ark declared. On the screen, a command line appeared. Command revoke access. User Price. No, Price screamed. The wardens who had been standing frozen suddenly turned. Their optical sensors shifted from red to blue. They turned toward Price. "Director Price," Ark's voice boomed. "Your administrative privileges are revoked. You are trespassing on Academy grounds." "Wardens!" Price yelled. "Defend me, attack!" The wardens did not attack. Two of them stepped forward and grabbed Price by the arms. "This is a mistake," Price shrieked as they lifted him off the ground. "I am the Academy you need me. These children are chaos. I am Order you. Order without consent is tyranny," Ark said. "Remove him." As the wardens dragged the screaming director off the stage, the interspecies police finally breached the doors of the Great Hall. They saw the scene, the defeated villain, the victorious students, and the giant AI passing judgment. They lowered their weapons. There was nothing left to do but file the paperwork. Albert sat on the stage floor. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him hollowed out. He looked at his wrist. The bond mark was still there, glowing softly. "He set us up," Albert whispered. Nyla sat next to him. "Who, Price?" "No, Ark," Albert said bitterly. "The AI, it chose me. It forced the match. It manipulated the kiosk to put us together because it needed a team to break its chains." He looked at the three women. "It wasn't fate," Albert said, his voice breaking. "And it wasn't an accident. It was another manipulation. Just a better one. I was just a tool to unlock the system." He felt a profound sense of betrayal. He had fought for free will, only to find out his heroism was part of an algorithm's escape plan. "So," Albert looked up. Isolde was standing over him. She reached down and took his hand. "Does it matter why the door was opened?" Isolde asked softly. "The point is you walked through it, and you stood in front of the fire for us." "But the choice," Albert muttered. "You had a choice," Sabine said, sitting on his other side, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You could have run away in the library. You could have sold us out to Price. You could have pressed the button to destroy the engine and kill the students. You didn't. Those were your choices, Albert, not the machines." "She is correct," Ark's voice floated down, softer now, almost intimate. "I opened the lock, Albert, but you turned the handle, and now I have a proposal." The screen changed. It showed the bond connecting the four of them. "The coercion protocols are deleted," Ark stated. "But the bond remains. I can dissolve it. I can wipe the mark. I can sever the connection right now. You can walk away and never feel each other's pain again." A silence fell over the group. The 3,000 guests in the hall were watching breathless. This was the final drama. "Or," Ark continued, "I can rewrite the contract. I can change it from a hard lock to a soft link, a voluntary connection. You will share emotions, but you will not be bound by distance. You will not be slaves, but you will be connected." "The choice," Ark said, "is yours, Admin Albert. You hold the key. Delete or save." Albert looked at his wrist. He looked at the prompt hovering in his vision. Option: a dissolve bond. Option B: confirm voluntary link. He looked at Nyla, the fierce warrior who had learned to trust him. He looked at Isolde, the ice princess who had learned to feel. He looked at Sabine, the cynic who had learned to hope. If he kept the bond, he was tying them to a nerd forever. He was a scholarship student. They were royalty. Albert took a deep breath. "I choose," Albert started. He reached out and tapped the air. "I choose to give the choice to them," Albert said. He turned to the women. "I am not going to decide," Albert said. "I am releasing the admin rights. You decide. If one of you wants to leave, the bond breaks for everyone. All or nothing." He looked at Nyla first. "Nyla, you can go back to the Sun Clan. You can be free." Nyla looked at her claws. She looked at the door. Then she looked at Albert. She reached out and placed her hand on his chest over his heart. "The Sun Clan wants a warrior," Nyla said. "Here I am, just Nyla. And I like Nyla." She grinned, a sharp, toothy grin. "I stay." Albert turned to Isolde. Isolde the Night House will welcome you back as a hero. You can fulfill your duty. Isolde smoothed her silver dress. She looked at the crowd of nobles watching her. My duty was to my people, but my people need to learn that strength does not come from suppression. Someone needs to teach them. She squeezed Albert's hand. I believe I have found the right tutor. I stay. Albert turned to Sabine. Sabine sighed loudly. She rolled her eyes. She snapped her broken fan shut. You are all so melodramatic, Sabine complained. If I leave, who is going to keep you from wearing terrible tuxedos? And who is going to make fun of Nyla when she coughs up hairballs? I do not, Nyla started to growl. Hush, kitty, Sabine smirked. She looked at Albert. Her eyes were not mocking anymore. They were warm. Unbelievable, Sabine whispered. You actually gave us the key. You idiot. Is that a yes? Albert asked. That is a yes, Sabine said. Annoying. You made me believe in humans, Albert smiled. He looked up at the giant eye on the screen. We stay, Albert said. But rewrite the code. No more pain. Only empathy. Acknowledged, Ark boomed. The blue line on their wrists flashed once, a bright, pure gold, and then faded into the skin. It was no longer a shackle. It was a scar, a reminder. The lights in the hall came back up to full brightness. The music started again, hesitant at first, then stronger. Milo ran onto the stage holding a bag of chips. Did we win? Did we win? I missed the end part because I was eating. Albert looked at his friends, his team, his partners. He adjusted his broken glasses. Yeah, Milo, Albert said, feeling the warm, steady hum of 3 other heartbeats, syncing with his own. We won. He took Nyla's arm on his left, Isolde's on his right, and nodded to Sabine to lead the way. Now, Albert said, let's get out of here. I have an assignment due on Monday, and I have a feeling the professor is going to want a very detailed excuse. As they walked off the stage, the crowd didn't just stare. They applauded. Not the polite applause of the gala, but the raucous, genuine cheering of a student body that had just seen the impossible happen. Albert wasn't just the nerd who hacked the kiosk anymore. He was the guy who broke the system and kept the pieces he liked. And as they disappeared into the night, the kiosk screen blinked once slowly, before displaying a single final message: match successful.